entomologist. Got it. Yay. Retired entomologist of the USDA Forest Service and Forest Health Protection. Yes. Okay. So presenting for our chapter in this wonderful hybrid format. So thank you, Bill.
All right. Well, hello to the present and virtually present. Am I on here, folks?
Yes.
Yes. Well, since we are in an academic institution, I should point out that I'm actually Dr. Bill Schaupp. I have a PhD from the University of California. My major professor was David Wood, an international bark beetle specialist. I was adopted by David because my professor had to leave. I wanted to become a specialist in wasps and do biological control. And I got as far as a temporary faculty position at the University of Minnesota doing that. And then I got this job that basically has been plagued by bark beetles all the way. And I know this is necessary because of all the jokes and the nasty things I said to all the graduate students who couldn't think of anything but bark beetles. So now we'll do nothing but bark beetles. You're probably wondering what you're looking at. That is an image taken from an airplane during aerial survey operations of the Gerhardt Mountain Wilderness, which is north of Bly, south of Lakeview. What you're looking at is an epidemic of the mountain pine beetle. In the lower right, we have ponderosa pine killed by the mountain pine beetle. In most of the image, lodgepole pine killed by the mountain pine beetle. And at the higher altitudes, white bark pine also being killed by mountain pine beetle. So this should give you an idea that there are some things they can do that are pretty drastic. Now, which thing do I push? That one. Not that one. Nope, the arrow. How do you get rid of that?
And then
So
this
there we go.
There we go.
Ha. So
His screen lights him up.
yeah, if you can see me, I don't care if it's dark.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is do some general things about bark beetles so that I don't forget some important generalities, and then go dive into the specifics. And I figure I told the folks here, you're just going to have to stop me when the time is up, because I tried really hard to get rid of slides and I just kept adding more. So anyway, what you're looking at is a mountain pine beetle on the right. Many people claim that the Forest Service shield is present on some of them. That's not really true. They are small, very small, like 1/4 inch or less usually. They are natives. They are an integral part of ecosystems here. And of course, because many of them are tree species specific, it makes it slightly easier to figure out what's going on. So here you have the mountain pine beetle itself. For those of you not familiar with insects, 3 body parts: head, where's the pointer thing? It isn't one, too bad. Head, thorax, and abdomen. All insects that have wings have 4 of them, except flies. The beetles have 2 hardened wings as a shell, and underneath those 2 hardened wings are 2 wings that are very large and very well folded up. They can fly maybe 5 to 10 miles worth of flapping. Who knows how much of a straight line they can manage. They have, they're blown around by the wind at more than 5 miles an hour. So 6 legs, and then you notice the eyes are those long, funny shapes. And I would like to call your attention not only to those 2 ball-like structures, those are their antennae with which they smell, but above the jaws and what looks like a lip, that's a maxilla, and we will revisit the maxilla under electron microscopy later. So what are they doing? Well, they eat trees and parts of trees, and this has a way of killing them. They are a number of different generations and lifestyles, even though they're under one banner of bark beetles. They have very important allies that they carry on their body, fungi and bacteria that play an essential role in their lives. And they, as you noticed in the first picture, they're capable of expanding their populations. They actually can have stable population dynamics at very high densities, which is unusual for animals to be able to have both high and low density stable populations. So they affect just about every element of forest ecology. The dynamics, of course, if you get rid of all those mature trees, then suddenly there's room for small trees. And that's an old story with bark beetles. Fuels, they create fuels. Obviously timber recreation, those are human-oriented things that they interfere with, especially timber, where a lot of the research that I'm reporting to you comes from, is concerns about wood that was desired by people, not bark beetles. The hydrologic effect of these epidemics has to be noted as rare because it requires an immense amount of removal of live tree material to cause a measurable change in the flow and turbidity of the water. They've done a lot of experiments in Colorado with that. So how many trees will they kill? Well, you know, that was my job for a long time, and that's how I got made a fool of by bark beetles, a lot. I pushed the button and it didn't go. I had to admit something. You had to admit it for me. Here we go. Hey, advance.
Oh.
Please.
Oh, click anywhere on the white screen there and then do the arrow.
Here, you have to like get the arrow back onto the screen and then.
Oh, there's the
There we
arrow.
go.
This is exciting. So entomologists have a chip on their shoulder about how little attention their organisms receive. This is a 360-degree circle with each degree representing 4,200 named and described species on Earth. This is from about 1980. I would like to call your attention to the fact that the Coleoptera on the lower right, that's beetles. There's more species of beetles than there are flowering plants. About 75% of the species binomials for animals are insects. So they're all over the place. Here's the formal classification. Bark beetles used to have their own family, Scolitidae. Due to extreme similarity with the Curculionidae, which are weevils and snout beetles, they've been merged. So now I guess you could say bark beetles have been demoted to a subfamily. Although I don't usually mess with taxonomic ranks like that. Anyway, there are quite a few species of bark and ambrosia beetles listed in Oregon, and about 1.5 degrees of that circle worldwide, 6,000 species. We haven't had a whole lot of introductions of bark beetles. Again, there's that tree specificity issue, but I will show you a kind of bark beetle that we're getting more and more of. So in order to try to make sense of this bewildering amount of variety, talking about plant feeding groups or guilds has a lot of virtue. You can see the different parts of the forest tree that might be affected. We're going to be talking, and I'm going to be talking, sorry, you don't get to, of phloem and wood. Well, there's some here who can. Yes, phloem and wood boring insects. Okay, well, I just thought I'd show you a weevil for the heck of it. The thing on the upper left, that's an adult weevil. The larvae can't be told apart from bark beetle larvae. They're almost identical. So it's really hard. Excuse me. So now the other thing is classifying the bark beetles and their cousins, the wood borers, based on whether they can kill a tree by themselves or not. Listed under primary are the primary bark beetles in our area. These can kill trees on their own if enough beetles show up in a short enough time to their host. They are opportunistic, as I'll talk about later, but they are capable on their own. The secondaries are not. That's 3 families of beetles, one of wasps, and those are wood wasps, not yellow jackets, and then ambrosia beetles. Because with insects, none of these generalities hold, there is a flat-headed wood borer called Phenops drummondii that is not a bark beetle. It is, however, been killing a lot of trees around here. I've been doing research on it for about 10 years. And so that's one of the exceptions. Anyway, on to meet the beetles. This is an interesting branch of the evolutionary tree of bark beetles. The ambrosia beetles are probably the more primitive of the group. They're extremely small. They do not eat phloem and they do not eat wood. They are fungus farmers. If you see the A and B lines on there, this looks like they go way into the tree, way in toward the heartwood. Doing all that boring and tunneling, you can see produces a lot of sawdust, which you see in a big skirt around the tree on the lower right. So these were researched first of the bark beetles because of their impact on logs that were stacked up.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We got this.
I am 71 years old. Okay, so
No.
I don't know about that. I'll ask you later. So anyway, they stain the wood. They have these really incredible fungi. The wood has to be just the right humidity. If it's too dry, the fungi don't grow and the larvae can't eat. If it's too wet, the fungi overgrow everything and nobody gets to eat. And this is why you find log decks with sprinklers on top of them, not just to keep the wood from checking and drying, but to keep these creatures out of there. It's also, if you put the wood in a pond, they won't go for it either. Unfortunately, these creatures, though they in a native setting are involved with both hardwood and conifers as part of the cleanup crew, they can move across continents because they're way in the middle of this chunk of wood. Now, there are international rules about heating wood up to 160 degrees for 30 minutes, but they don't always all do that, and it doesn't always kill them all. Unfortunately, in the Southeast now, we have an ambrosia beetle that is killing trees, not by virtue of changing its habits, but when one beetle goes into the tree, its fungus is so novel and virulent to the tree, it kills it. What are those called? It's a laurel, red bay. They're about wiping out red bay.
And they bring the spores with them.
Yes, they're covered with them. In fact, they have very special, we're frozen again. What did you do last time?
Oh, just click on the screen. Yeah, anywhere on the screen.
Ah! So there are lots of those species in Oregon and North America that are very small bark beetles that don't do anything that annoys people. So they don't do research on them and they don't know what they do. You've probably been out in the woods and found a stick that had the most amazing looking engraving on it. Well, that's a twig beetle, probably. Another branch, that beetle on the upper left should look a lot like the mountain pine beetle, or more of a hood on its head there, but they infest cones of conifers. And you can see on the smaller of the cones that are shown on the plant is an infested one. When you cut them in half, you see the larvae inside, kills the cone. The people at Dorina who are trying to breed disease-resistant white pines really don't like these. They have a pheromone. So does the ambrosia beetle, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. With my job, I tried just to talk ecologically here and biologically, but I can't avoid pointing out that the issue of pests is all around this, as far as what's been researched, what we know, what we've tried, and what's going on out in the woods. So these are some of the reasons that one might consider an insect a pest. The bottom one, of course, is pretty drastic, and there's more and more of that happening every day. So I would contend that if you look at these two scenarios, on the right, I've already shown you the Gearharts, but on the left, this is a restorative project outside of Prospect. They didn't quite do it right. The Western pine beetle wiped out a very old, very large, huge pine. So this kind of recapitulates a bunch of what I've mentioned. I should point out, you see those beetles, you're likely to see them very rarely. You're maybe dead inside the galleries. It's the larvae you're going to find. Anyway, they are opportunistic despite being able to kill trees by themselves. These pheromones means message bearing chemical. They have a very sophisticated way of aggregating and also repelling each other. And I'll explain that. They do inoculate the host. It's essential. And like I say, not only are they mostly under the bark, but you can't get at them. So all these ideas people have of getting rid of them, which personally is a bad idea, it's a terrible idea, but yeah, whatever. So they attack in characteristic places as well. So on the bottom, you have some turpentine beetles. You can see on the left, they are really an indicator of stress. I probably won't talk about them more. Great big pitch tubes, huge gooey looking things. They just go in there and eat some of the tree and don't really do anything, but they only go into trees that have stress. The mountain pine beetle tends to be in the bottom 6 feet where it initiates attacks. You can see that in the middle. The western pine beetle in the middle of the tree, spreading up and down. And then if you go up to Krausen Reservoir in Ashland, you'll see there's some top kill of the ponderosa pines. They also had to remove some pines that had western pine beetle in them before they came out, and they got it done. But check this out. Every part of the pine tree got a bark beetle. And it's only the ones that attack the stem that are capable of killing the entire tree. The ones that attack the roots often are bearing fungi that give the disease to the tree, or disease-causing organisms transmitted anyway. And then the top gets killed, or branches. That doesn't kill the tree. Might make it a little more stressed out, but there's a bark beetle for everyone. This is more of what they look like. I kind of like the one on the lower right. It looks sort of like a hot rod. You know, it's got little spines. That's fine until you have to count the spines to tell what it is. This is what you're going to see more than likely, not the adults. These are the characteristic galleries created under the bark by females who are laying eggs. You can see in the upper left, that's the Douglas fir beetle's signature. They alternate left and right. Excuse me. Those tunnels get wider because the larvae grow. They molt and get bigger. And so the western pine beetle is second from the bottom right. We call it spaghetti western because it looks like spaghetti. And so this is a way that you can tell with the name of the host, the known host, known gallery, known beetle. I don't mean to suggest that no one knows this, but I do find it necessary to point out sometimes that egg, larva, pupa, and adult are the stages of higher insects. The larvae themselves, you can see the little tiny pearlescent eggs in the gallery. The larvae are C-shaped, legless. They look like they're corrugated, and they have on top of their head a head capsule that's light brown. It looks like a beret. It's a very rakish egg. When the hormones are right and their development is finished, they make a chamber for themselves. You can see second from the right, go through metamorphosis and turn into something else, which I've wanted to do every morning, but it hasn't happened. So what do they eat? Well, okay, they eat cambium, phloem, and outer bark, depending on who they are. By doing that, of course, you're going to kill the tree outright if you get it all. In the lower left, you can see the staining of the blue stain fungi. In many of the conifer species, the blue stains do not produce a visible stain, but they are present. All of them consume only the sugars in the cells, not the lignin. And so therefore the wood is as structurally sound and strong as it ever was. But you try to tell a tree that has blue stain. They even tried to call it denim pine. What I don't understand is that you can pay extra if it's a blue stain paneling that you're buying. So figure that. Anyway, there's the larvae on the lower right. And the cambium, for those of you who are not familiar with tree anatomy, is the actual dividing and growing part of the tree, the only dividing and growing part of the tree other than the needles. It grows in both directions, making more phloem and more xylem. Remember xylem up, phloem down? You got all that, your botanists. Okay, sorry. Okay, here's your question. If you can see it all. No. How can an animal this size kill a great big tree? I don't really know what it says, but you know, that's what it means. And that's probably a spruce beetle, although they look a lot alike. Well, how can they do this? They call their friends. Here's the pheromone situation. They don't produce a single chemical. They produce a suite of chemicals, some straight terpenes straight from the host, some are biosynthesized, and some are host materials that are altered into something else. I had to learn about stereochemistry, the spatial array of chemicals, because many of them, including this creature, Ips, it's a genus, they have both plus and minus of ipsinol and ipsdienol in different mixtures, depending on what species. on what individual. So it's really quite something. So the Canadians put this together to try to explain the whole story. Start at the top. I don't know if you can see that there's a one dispersal. Out of the brood tree comes pioneer female beetles. They find an acceptable tree. I don't know how they do that. They bite into it. As soon as they do so, they start releasing pheromone. It's extremely attractive from a long distance. The beetles have a week or two to attack this portion or whatever it is they're trying to infest. And if they don't get there in enough numbers in a short enough time, the tree will win. So this is why they have an aggregation pheromone. Now, females produce a different plume and blend than mated females. And mated females and males have about the same plume. So as the tree accumulates beetles, and particularly mated females and males, said that backwards, the message changes. It's attractive from a distance. As they get closer, basically it says the hotel's full, go next door. The chemical is called verbenone. It's been identified. We don't seem to be able to get it to work except with white pines, but you can actually, they're doing this at Crater Lake. I've helped them do it. They put verbenone out there to drive the mountain pine beetles away, to tell them, hey, it's full. There is a chemical with the Douglas fir beetle called methylcyclohexanone, MCH, which I have used extensively, which works like a charm. The thing is, we don't need it around here, at least not now. But in the Rocky Mountains, I've done spectacular things where entire canyons are dead and the little green campground in the bottom has got this their own pheromone telling them go next door. So then if they overcome the tree, everybody lays eggs, everybody starts to grow, it's all happy. We go through the different sequence, come out the other end. This funny looking thing with a little, where's this? There it is. That is a seta, but this is a mycangium. This is a place where the fungus is kept by the Ips beetle, and those are spores that you can see under an electron microscope. So they got it. And this is one of my favorites. I told you to remember the lips of the mountain pine beetle. Well, if you dissected those, they aren't really lips, but okay. The maxilla has a little hole you can see right by that arrow right there. This is this. That is a micron or half a micron, 1/1000th of an inch. This is a hyphal mass, fungal mass from the mycangium of the mountain pine beetle. And when Kathy took this gal I know took this micrograph, it's just an incredible happenstance to see this. This is where the mountain pine beetle stores the fungus that it's its ally. Other ones have other structures, and some of them even have nutritive secretions. This is an old story. There are several of the blue stain species with different temperature regimes, which temperature maxima and what do you call it? Best? No, they're best temperature optimal. Thank you. There's a climate change issue in that maybe, but one of the things that folks discovered after a while was these fungi at first thought to be weeds in the galleries of beetles are actually essential in their life, shutting down the tree. But also you see this is a sporulating fungus. They're eating it right before they've hardened. You see this is a young beetle, so it hasn't hardened its own skin and turned dark. They get sterols from this fungus, and insects can't produce sterols. So, and they use them in their pheromone. So they get essential nutrients from their pals also. And the pals don't occur free living. They're only associated with bark beetles. So this puts it together. This is the sort of thing I'd show in the Black Hills where I took this picture. If you have the beetles and they're successful, they're girdling the tree, the fungal and bacterial friends are cutting down the water conduction, and then you have a susceptible forest and some good weather, you get mayhem. Yes.
Quick setting and
Oh, do something.
hide this.
Oh,
We figured this out right before you got here. High
Cool.
floating meeting control.
So they would know.
Now we could see more.
You know
about
what the
it.
question was. Okay, that always helps when you want to form an answer. So one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is in these conifers, at the initial stage of infestation, the tree stays green. The foliage does not fade at first. So this is a mountain pine beetle idealized sort of life cycle. Timing around here, I don't know, it's strange. But anyway, let's just pretend it works like this. Out comes the pioneer beetle on the left side, goes into the green tree. You see maybe pitch tubes if it has enough resistance. They start to have galleries. It still doesn't look different. And then it starts to turn a sort of a pale green. The foliage gets to a pale green. And then if it's a ponderosa pine, it'll turn straw yellow. Lodgepole pines turn a little more of an orange color, and then eventually turns red. And this happens in a very short period of time, and it is not a portion of the tree that fades. The infested part fades entirely. So if these are in the top, the whole top goes. If this is mountain pine beetle, the entire tree turns in a matter of a few days or a week, just boom, runs out of water. So the holy grail for me was trying to find green infested trees. So we've tried to do that with remote sensing. You can't do that. Can't see them from the air. I mean, it's too bad. So it's taken a long time to get to the plant part, you botanists. But the host, as I've tried to intimate, is in no way passive. When the beetle bites into one of these conifers, there are radial resin ducts in all of them, particularly large in the pines, that have a constitutive defense. Tries to push them out. Just boom, out with you, beetle. You bit a hole in my resin duct and you're going out. You can see in the upper right photograph, there is a beetle that got pushed out. This requires the tree to be healthy enough to do it. The other thing that the tree will do, if it's healthy enough, is they synthesize toxins in the needles and move them down to where the beetle is attacking. This is an old story. And sometimes the tree wins and sometimes the tree loses. And there's been a lot of research that I think is really fascinating, looking at the changes in how these things go. And one of my favorite examples that I should have mentioned earlier is that one of the toxins that the tree produces and brings to the beetle is converted by the beetle into a pheromone component. So instead of trying to sequester it or detoxify it, they transmit it into a useful chemical for themselves. So there's an arms race of sorts. I don't like talking about arms, but anyway, you know, if they're on bugs, it's okay. How can you tell the tree's infested if it's green? All right, well, all those little beetles, a couple of them are square foot eating their way in there, are going to leave some dust. On the left, you've got spruce. You can see that red stuff next to my pen. And then there's my hand right there on a Douglas fir. And you can see there's a characteristic sort of texture and size to this stuff, because there's lots of shredding things out there, ant nests and all that. This looks really different, and it's not only in the crevices on the tree, but if the tree's been really heavily attacked, there'll be a ring around it on the floor, on the ground, a frass ring. I already mentioned pitch tubes, but I want to see on the right, that's unsuccessful attack, white runny pitch. On the left, those look like gum someone stuck on the tree that has a pink hue to it. They made it into the phloem. You cannot count them and determine whether the tree will die, unfortunately, because many of the entrances are blind or in crevices, don't produce pitch tubes. A really weak tree can't produce them at all. So that's another thing. You can see here examples of, on the left, a couple of unsuccessful attacks with the white pitch. And then on the right, that's a tree that had an unsuccessful attack by a female. She made about a 3-foot long egg gallery, and it was flooded with pitch. So you can see that she lost, and that tree probably won't die, even though it's marked. Another way to tell that the bark beetles have been involved are these pouch fungi. This is Cryptoporus vulvatus. It's a decay fungus that you find. They enter through either holes the beetles make, the wood borers made, or actually on the bodies of the beetles, because they come out of trees that are starting to decay already. What eats them? Well, the upper left, you can see that if you look, you ought to look at that for a second here. This is that's the bark beetle right there in the jaws of this beetle. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. And that's a red-bellied clarid. They respond to the pheromone. They actually chemically eavesdrop. So it smells like the dinner bell to them and not let's come mate and lay eggs. And then you see on the lower left, that's hard to see, but that's basically a larva that has a wasp larva on it. The wasps lay eggs through the bark, paralyze the larva, lay their egg on it, and it eats them just like in the movie Alien. Oh, well, that's that's expected. So I better hurry up. That's the long-legged fly. Their larvae are bark beetle predators under the bark, and then you got yourself a black-backed woodpecker, who is a friend of mine in the Black Hills. Other woodpeckers are very important in trying to find infested trees. They don't waste their time. If they get a reward, they go for it, and otherwise not. So I use birds a lot. Here's one way to tell. On the left, you have a spruce tree. The snow under it is completely covered with shaved bark because spruce has very thin bark and is full of spruce beetles. The tree on the right is a lodgepole pine that got so shaved you can barely see the bark at the bottom. They ate all the larvae. And this happens around here with western pine beetle in large ponderosa pines. So this, the people with fire, they're used to doing triangle things, and I kind of like this. This is the photo I took in the Black Hills. This is the back of Mount Rushmore. So you can see that each of these three things is needed for an epidemic of this size. Stand conditions. Look at this. It's totally crowded, way more trees than can be sustained by the land. And in addition, they're big enough to be infested. The bark beetle population rose up because the weather was good. In any media report you hear, you're going to see the lower right. It won't say weather, it'll say climate, and they won't mention the left and the top. Those are both as important. You can't have an outbreak without food. When I entered graduate school in the 1980s, the professors were waving their arms that the entire Western United States was overgrown, too many trees, and Mother Nature was going to clean up. And boy, has she. Messy. So the dynamics of these populations are affected by events, of course. Stand conditions on the lower left is not the best photo, but it's a big blowdown on the coast. The Douglas fir beetle can build up in the down trees and has had huge epidemics in Oregon in the 1950s and the 1960s following the Columbus Day storm. Produced so much.
So you can talk in here, but you don't have your presentation, which really sucks. So we're gonna work.
I have
on
another one in
that.
my pocket.
Yeah, let's try that. You have one in your pocket, great. And do I have, I don't want this to happen again, so.
You just plug this up right into your laptop.
Yeah, we can totally do that. And it's on the other side.
The good part.
I know. Like,
No,
of course. Of course. Okay, folks, add, give us a moment and we adjust here.
Get a little more.
I know, it's pretty bad.
I know, I was like, did you see the percentage on that?
I'm sure it just depends on each battery's condition.
Oh.
This is why I keep deleting all those things Zoom sends me. Maybe I should read them.
I don't know. Do you have that much time on you?
What?
Do you have time on your hands to read all the Zoom notifications?
Oh, I'm afraid I do, actually.
Oh.
It's retirement is trickier than I thought.
Did you work for the Forest Service here?
Well, I should have mentioned, I worked for the Forest Service, but I served all federal forest land managers regardless of department or agency.
Like interagencies?
It didn't matter. whoever, whatever. While here, I worked with the Park Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, the BLM, a great deal, the Forest Service, any federal, anybody. And we also have a very important state assistance role. The law is called the Cooperative Forest Assistance Act. It's from the 1930s. Updated in the 70s and elsewhere in time. And it produced basically about 200 to 300 overeducated entomologists and pathologists nationally. And we're supposed to help. The first thing you try to do is figure out what the land manager is trying to do. Because at Crater Lake, they have a different set of goals than they do with BLM. And, you know, that
Planning the log crater lake. for timber.
I'll bet they were. Well, you know, people used to come to see the colonnade of sugar pines on the way to Crater Lake with almost the same interest as Crater Lake itself. And there are some jaw-dropping photographs that you can easily find in archives. And I know where some of those trees still
Like
are.
62 or up the road?
Up 62, yeah, around Prospect.
Uh-huh.
You could drive through the forest. It wasn't overgrown like it is. And the trees were immense. And some of them are still there.
Yes,
I visit my friends and we've tried to keep them alive and keep the bark beetles away from them by reducing competition around them. And with mixed results. And so now it's the Western pine beetle research story is indicative of the changes here. They did an immense amount of research out of a building on 3rd and C in Ashland. This is our home on the porch. I rented that building. The first place I called when I came to town. It was not a coincidence. I just ended up there. Research from 1918 to 1925. They worked on the Western pine beetle almost entirely.
Sarah, can you put his PowerPoint on? I think we lost it. But we can keep going here. And we can't with my laptop. I can do Zoom on my laptop, but I can't
It lets me put, I can,
project because my HDMI, I don't have my adapter for the
Well, the
HDMI.
rest of the
Right.
story is that.
I can turn on the
They
campus
summarize
thing
all this
and log in, but I don't think it lets me install anything on it.
No, we
because-
just have a
Which is 6 by
PowerPoint
6
presentation,
miles.
so we should be able to
How they
just
get
open
big
that. And
maps.
I'm assuming they have PowerPoint.
They would ride the entire.
Yeah,
thing
so
on
let's
a
try
horse.
that and see how that
Count
goes.
dead trees. Can you imagine doing that now? I mean, you can bulldozer in front of a horse.
Wow,
So,
Zoom has changed.
And then they wrote up all this research. It's a book called The Biology of
Oh, there we go.
Control. It's brilliant. But
Hey
it
there.
doesn't really relate to the forest we have now. All these small, dense pine stands that are being killed by Western pine beetles, they never did that. That was the mountain pine beetles.
Can you hear us? Okay, good. Yeah.
Well, actually, there was
Sorry about that,
ponderosa
y'all.
pines too.
Oh, we're getting
But
ready.
in a really
You look beautiful.
It was sugar pine because they made shingles out of them and beams, and then incense cedar because everyone made pencils out of incense cedar. All of those, there didn't used to be mechanical pencils or ballpoint pens or any of that. It was a quill or a chunk of incense cedar. And that's why there's not a lot of big incense cedars out there, because they're gone. The other problem with the sugar pine, there would be a lot more of them if it wasn't for, I got to the white pine blister list. It's a foreign disease. It's terrible. It affects all white.
Unmute. Yay, now we're. All the settings.
See how much easier this is?
All the 50 settings. I know.
Well, hey, I was really worried. I was really worried you're gonna cut me off after a half an hour. So I'm like, yeah, let's go.
All right.
So moisture is an important element in all of this. Obviously, if you look at the Warner Mountains, you can see that the red is really right on the edge of the places where there are no trees. That's kind of common. It's called an edge effect. And so that's important. And then tree damaging events, we already started with that. So, the trees have to be the right size, things have to be right. And then when they are, things go wild. But a lot of this is single tree gap phase dynamics in the forest, and it isn't really all these things getting killed that are big. I'm trying to. So with the backdrop of dog hair, as it's known, or beetle bait, these are all the things that might be risk factors for bark beetles. And I've already mentioned a whole lot of them. I want to say that what we've been learning working with these dying Doug firs is that when you have both a drought co-occur with high temperatures, there is an additive effect, and the return of a normal moisture regime doesn't usually cause the tree to recover right away. There is some kind of hot drought injury that's going on here. We think it has to do with embolisms in the tracheids. The trees normally repair their embolisms with sugars. They can't make sugars if they've closed their stomata in order to avoid desiccation, or if the temperature is too high, Doug firs in the summer shut down completely. They're then carbon starved. They're not defending themselves anymore. And guess who shows up? In fact, I think the flat-headed fir borer just thinks the trees are dying, and they just happen to be able to survive in them. So anyway, I wanted to talk about root rot. It's really important. So is dwarf mistletoe. That's hopefully you know about those. Those are really interesting parasitic seed plants, flowering plants that infest the conifers. And in fact, in Douglas fir, in our area, they produce dwarf mistletoe brooms, which is crazy growth that's all thick and dense. It's the primary nesting habitat of the northern spotted owl in our area. And the owls are doing really well here because they can nest in that stuff. When you go to graduate school, they tell you that dwarf mistletoe wipes out stands by dropping seeds down on the young trees. It's a pest. It reduces growth. It also promotes fishers and owls. So managing the land in the Ashland watershed is a dualish sort of affair. You promote the mistletoe where the owls nest, and on the ridge tops where you don't want any more seeds of this stuff, you kill it. So, sorry, back to management again, but it's a habit. So the last two are really rather important. If a logging operation leaves a lot of material that is still moist and infestable, then it can lead to a lot of trouble, both with spruce as well as pine. Beetles, bark beetles breed and it come out, there's no more food, they start attacking live trees. And then of course, no plant likes to have their roots stomped on. So the pines really, as hopefully I intimated before, are kind of the core of the bark beetle story in the West. This just reiterates the things that cause stress, including competition from any kind of plant. And that's what happens when a sugar pine gets nailed. So I spent a lot of time in scenarios like this, where the dense understory is a new feature of that tree's environment around it. It may have happened in the past, but probably some disturbance or other kept the forest a little more open than that. We've been losing our sugar pines due to white pine blister rust, an important disease that is foreign, that's been in the United States since about 1910, maybe 1930 down here. Alternate host is ribes. This fungus kills all the white pines, the young white pines, and weakens the adults. They're more susceptible to bark beetles when they're infected. So what do you do if you don't like what the bark beetles are doing? Well, these are your choices. You can protect individual trees. That's obviously expensive, and around here they're too big anyway. It's difficult. Killing beetles can be effective if you get a large percentage of the population. For example, up at Krausen Reservoir, They got rid of most of the infested trees before the beetles came out. And I think things look pretty good. And it turns out that was a relatively isolated pocket. If all the hillsides were turning red at the same time, I would have told them not even bother. But that altering the bark beetle habitat, thinning, giving the trees less stress, that's the long-term approach that does have a lot of merit, and there's been a lot of work on it. Now, whoever asked about what's going on up high, if you're still with us out on Zoom land, one of the problems with the fir engraver, which is the beetle that's killing those trees in all the firs, is that they, well, first of all, they don't have a pheromone. Second, they live in trees without killing them necessarily at low densities, very strongly associated with root disease, both Heterobasidian anosis disease and armillaria, which is what you're looking at in the upper right. And anywhere where the rainfall is below 25 inches a year, you can expect lots of dead trees. And the droughts set them off, these beetles. So just to let you know, a little local thing, sorry, it's metric. And this just lets you know that what you're looking at, the green bar across is average rainfall in Medford. The red line is variation from 1960 to 2011. And I just want you to notice that when the red line goes below the green line, the blue bars get really big. There, you're looking at 60, 70,000 trees near the top in a given year. That's the ones they can actually spot and map. And who knows how many more they missed. So it does matter. Now, here's another situation. I already mentioned that when you have either a root disease pocket with a small episode or a big blowdown, you can fire up the Douglas fir beetle. I wonder if in the future around here, if the Douglas fir stress continues to increase, that maybe the Douglas fir beetle will visit us in a big way. It certainly hasn't, but it could. Right now, it's usually small tree type things. If there's a down tree, you can usually find them in it. But essentially, you need a bunch of down trees for them to come up with enough beetles to kill a standing one. So back to pine bark beetles. You can see the blue stain on the upper right, the pitch tubes. Here's the whole story. You can meet some of the specific beetles. Here's the pine engravers. They are small. They attack the tops and big branches and also saplings. You can see where my buddy down there is standing in front of a bunch of dead saplings. Multiple generations. These are the ones where if you leave a whole bunch of pine material that's 3 to 10 inches in diameter, they breed in it. And if they have no alternative, they'll go after living trees. During a drought, they can actually cause an outbreak. And it's difficult when you tell people they need to do this expense and clean up, and most of the time nothing happens. Well, when it does, can't stop it. So mountain pine beetle on the left, female makes this gallery that goes straight up. Where are we? Over here, straight up. Larvae on the side, those are pupae. Spaghetti Western. Spaghetti Western used to be the big thing around here, and it kind of still is. It's the Grim Reaper of the big trees. It has a new role attacking dense aggregations, dense collections of pines that are younger and smaller, and can produce the sort of pattern you see in the lower right, although, which cracks me up, I didn't make this slide, but I did take that photograph in the Black Hills in 1992. So I don't know why it's here, but here we are. So vigor is really important in all of this. This is one of the things competition does, is reduce it. And sometimes root disease or just having your roots in the wrong place. So if you're a bark beetle, which one of these would you like? Yeah, the one on the right. You could overcome it really well. But your progeny would probably do better in the one on the left. And actually, during outbreaks in lodgepole pine, the mountain pine beetle has been known to switch to larger resource-rich trees when there are more beetles. And how they know how to do that is the next research question. The mountain pine beetle will attack any pine. Foreign pine, doesn't matter. Dendroctonus, for those of you who are Latin fans, dendro is the root for tree, root word, and then Ctonos is the god of death. So this means ponderosa tree killer. And it is. So this is what it's doing to the white pines. White bark, it's a big player in the stress that white bark pine is having right now across North America. It's listed in Canada, maybe here soon. they go after these trees that have white pine blister rust or other stressors and get them. So as I mentioned, they have low and high density stable populations. And there's a story with lodgepole pine that's really kind of unique. And I learned about it in grad school, and I saw it happen on the other side of the Cascades from Crater Lake all the way down in the pumice soils. And this was figured out by Bob Guerra at the University of Washington and his graduate students. And this is a cycle that occurs regularly. We have evidence 1930, 1970, 1990. Now, once the lodgepole pines become dense, large, and numerous enough, eventually the beetles will get to them. But you basically have this cycle. We have fire, regeneration, often with serotinous cones, which open under heat or fire. Stand starts to unravel a little bit with maybe a little burn here. It's diseases causing organisms to get in because of the wound. And then the beetles blow it up and repeat. In fact, we're just in the post blow up phase over at Crater Lake, and on the other side is sort of calmed down. Until next time. It amazes me that people who live over there are surprised. Many people who live long enough to have 2 or 3 of these things happen. So why is it a surprise? So just to really dazzle you near the end of all this, this is central British Columbia in 2005. It's not fall, those are lodgepole pine trees. Between 1995 and 2005, in the Rocky Mountains and in Alberta and British Columbia, 60 million acres was affected by the mountain pine beetle, to not quite this degree everywhere, but very much. Unfortunately, the little bark beetles I told you no one knows about so much, they bred in such profusion in these larger trees that were being killed that they moved into the plantations, which the Canadians thought would at least come mature later. Remember, they sell a lot of timber. It's very important in their economy. Their economy in British Columbia was devastated by this. About 40 million of the 60 million acres occurred in British Columbia and Alberta. And this is what it looks like now. Dead, as far as you can see. That's the Fraser River, I think. So, you know, it's around here, maybe not so much of a deal, but this is an interesting little climate change related closing, just to cheer you up. The black is the distribution of mountain pine beetle in the United States. Of course, it goes into Mexico, but I don't know, it didn't fit on the map. The black blob went further up into British Columbia this time than it has known to have been in the past, although we don't know much about the past, right? The past is kind of short. The first forest entomologist, A.D. Hopkins in the United States, started working in the 1880s. He's self-taught. So anyway, what happened was the mountain pine beetle sort of made it over the barren granite continental divide in Canada. They picked up big balls of bark beetles on radar. They wanted to know what these signatures were. Somebody had to fly up on a plane and figure it out. They're in such gigantic numbers. They blew over the continental divide, landed in the Peace River drainage and started down it, and were killing hybrid jack pine, lodgepole pine hybrids. Jack pine is sort of an ecological homologue of lodgepole. And the question is, are they going to make it all the way to New England? The answer, I think, is probably not, because it's really, really cold in Canada. On the other hand, it might eventually. And of course, the southern pine beetle has been making it all the way up to Long Island, so they might meet. It's worth pointing out that the mountain pine beetle is tuned to its environment, to no one's surprise. They have genetic wiring for their development. So if you take a high altitude beetle and you give it a nice, warm, wonderful log to live in, it's still going to turn its generation really fast, because that's what happens where they live. You either do it or you die. So anyway, this is where we're at with bark beetles. And I have a whole lot of other slides about other insects, which I'm sure you're probably pretty tired by now. Thank you for hanging on. And any of you. So, you know, hopefully Hopefully this was entertaining.
Any other questions in the chat there? There is one, which Christie wants to,
Shall I turn the presenter off and then you can see the people in the Zoom too?
Oh.
If we,
Well,
let's
not
see.
to-
8 there. So I think it's, let's see, stop share.
ask Christie to come back.
Here we go.
And
If-
so,
Ask Christy if what?
is that Christie?
Oh, Christy question. Okay. 100 years of fire suppression bill as an added stress that increases stand density also?
Absolutely. In fact, the sugar pine slide that I showed or in the hazard slide, it is the encroachment of shade tolerant, fire intolerant conifers that is the problem across the West. That pines require sun. They cannot reproduce in shade. Sugar pine can get started, but it has to have more sun later. And if you think about it, the pine trees are dropping flammable, oil-soaked needles that don't rot. And they also have really thick bark. Well, you think they're trying to call something? They're trying to call their buddy, fire. Douglas fir can't handle that at all, but it loves shade. A lot of the pines don't have wings on their, well, one of the pines doesn't have wings. They don't disperse well. The Doug fir seeds blow all over the place. So it's not always Douglas fir everywhere. They're, basically any shade tolerant species in the absence of fire explodes in number. And so this is an extremely important part of the stand density equation.
I have a question,
Question?
which probably will need to repeat for the people.
Well, I'll try as you're doing it.
Okay, so what you explained about that cycle of the fire maybe answers this question, but I was wondering about that kind of adage about parasites not killing their host. It doesn't work very well if they kill off their host. And you kept saying, well, they want to kill the tree. And I was like, well, why do they want to kill the tree? Why don't they just take what they need and then move on to the next one so that they can
Right.
use it like a cow?
Right. Well, so basically the question is, it's a good parasite that doesn't kill its host. What's going on with killing not only the tree itself, but the biggest one? In a lodgepole forest, and there's no infestation, I go to the biggest tree I can find to see if there are any beetles around. Well, here's my idea. I just sort of made this up. Knowing that these trees need shade, suppose you're a gigantic lodgepole pine. If you die first, the shade disappears first around you, and your progeny get the benefit of the sunlight that you have allowed to the ground by dying. It's an altruism argument in a way, although not a voluntary one. And I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that one. There was a wonderful piece of research by some folks done over in the lodgepole pumice soils, where they sorted out what was going on. Because if you just go in there and measure dead trees, there's innocent bystanders. The one right next to the tree that had a lot of pheromone gets killed. Well, it isn't necessarily one they want or would pick. So they did this crazy statistical analysis. And what it was able to show is these great big trees put out a great pheromone plume, much larger and attract more beetles. And a hole gets blown in the forest right around this thing that's big, and they get a head start. How does that sound for a made up?
I'll buy it. I had one other question.
Sure.
You said at the beginning, you were saying, here are the things that it affects, and you said it doesn't really affect hydrology. Did you go into that?
Well, it can, but it takes a really radical amount of mortality to actually have it happen. The first time anyone noticed this was what had been considered the biggest insect infestation of all time in North America, in Colorado in the late 40s, early 50s. And it did cause some flooding and things like that because of this tremendous loss of tree canopy. So the government, the Forest Service, went and took a mountain and just brutalized it by taking different amounts of trees away in different patterns and measured all the water. And so this is what's used by the hydrologists today to figure out the clear-cut equivalent water change comes from this Coon Mountain study and also at the experimental forest in Colorado. And so what I meant to say is that it takes a very big impact to get a detectable change at the water weir. But it does. And in Wyoming, I remember distinctly warning some USGS employees on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation that, you know, all these trees are all getting killed, and you better be careful when you go to measure your little stream gauge next year. And I did run into them in the middle of nowhere. And they said, thank you for the hint, you know, because yeah, you know, if you think about it, they're tremendous. The other thing that happens that people didn't realize is how much interception occurs on the needles themselves, particularly of snow, but also of rain. And it sublimates and never makes it to the ground. So you get rid of them, and they're not just wicking off water, they're actually catching some. So it does affect it, but there's been some lawsuits, actually, several of them that I followed closely, where the claim was that the water shortage is due to not enough logging. Yeah, you can see through that. Well, if the research showed it, then, you know, they'd have won. It's just you just have to log the hell out of it to get any measurable effect, which, you know, doesn't go over so well these days. Well, it depends who owns the land, frankly. Some of the stuff I've seen around here is it's not on public land. They don't do that.
I have one other question too. And that's
Sure.
About that. I love riding.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should look in, I think it's the spring. I keep forgetting who does who. But on the underside of the leaves, you get this beautiful, beautiful orange velvet. And that's all white pine blistera spores. Well, I don't know. The thing is, because it's a foreign disease, it's really hard to be happy with it. And it also hasn't attenuated enough in its new habitat. So this is acting more like a predator than a proper parasite. It might take a long time. And it's just awful. Because the double whammy of the sugar pine, you know, the lack of sun, the killing of the regen, you know, and the spores are everywhere. So you can't hide.
Any other questions in there?
Oh,
Okay, all right, lots of thanks in there. I think what we're gonna do is close down the Zoom. And I'll just.
More than 100 years too. It's where are you? Like almost 200.
Okay, keep the Zoom on. All right. Okay, if you